The Pentagon has announced that it will immediately begin removing around 1,000 transgender troops from the U.S. military. A memo from Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth says the military will force out any transgender troops who do not leave voluntarily by early June. President Donald Trump signed an executive order in January banning transgender military service, which the Supreme Court upheld while legal challenges work their way through the courts. Well, the memo from the Secretary of Defense to senior Pentagon staff stated that service by individuals with a current diagnosis or history of gender dysphoria is not in the best interest of the military services and is not clearly consistent with the interests of national security. Well, for more on this, we spoke earlier to William Glucroft. He's a U.S. analyst and deputy editor of Parliament magazine in Brussels. We asked him what's behind this order by the Trump administration.
Well, it just fits with the Trump administration's campaign against queer and transgender people in the United States. We see this across the U.S. government and also reaching into the private sector, like in universities. So the military is, of course, no exception. It mirrors a lot of the debate leading up into the don't ask, don't tell policy of the Clinton years, which allowed gay and lesbian people to serve in the U.S. military. Just they weren't allowed to disclose it. And then, of course, that was finally opened up under Obama, along with transgender people to be able to openly serve. The excuses now seem to be the same ones that were presented then, which is it somehow affects readiness or affects his troop morale, which if past is prologue, there was no real scientific evidence to suggest that back when it was about gay and lesbian service people. So it just seems to be a purely ideological position of the Trump administration.
And for more on this, we can speak now with Anastasia Biefang. She's the vice chairperson of Queer BW, which stands for Queer in Bundeswehr, and was the first openly transgender battalion commander in the German Armed Forces. Thanks for being with us. Anastasia, what do you make of the Trump administration's policy on transgender troops?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Terry. Well, first of all, it was pure shock and disbelief. I mean, it's something that we all expect in the community, coming from the presidential campaign and looking forward to the upcoming month. But I think we're still hopeful with the lower court still putting the ban on the transgender Trump. But in the end, it's something that is disheartening to all the service members. And I do know a few transgender service members in the armed forces. I served with them in Afghanistan. So for me, as an active duty officer and an advocate for queer and especially transgender rights in the armed forces, it's something that challenges my core deep beliefs on what actually entails military readiness, or what service transgender and queer people can bring into the military, and why this is a whole purely ideological step by the Trump administration that has nothing to do with the skills, professionalism, and the distinguished service of the transgender members of the armed forces in the States.
Now, you had your coming out, I understand, in 2015 while already serving with the Bundeswehr, the German army. How did your superiors and colleagues react?
Well, it did take me 20 years to come out as a transgender service member in the armed forces. So maybe that gives a bit of an idea of how the situation was, or how I perceived in the 20 years. But after the initial coming out, I experienced full support by my commanding officers, by my commers, by everybody, basically. And that support was also something that was really needed to help me actually, fulfill my duties as an officer in the armed forces on the one side, and also, move forward with my transition with gender affirming surgery. So actually to align both of the worlds that I deeply cherish, becoming my true self, and also, being my fullest as an officer dedicated to the mission and the German armed forces. So I'm gratefully, I'm wholeheartedly thankful about the support that I got, especially from my comrades, especially from my commanding officers and superiors, but also from the institution itself that changed over the course of the past 10 to 15 years to actually make it possible that queer and especially transgender service members can actually perform their duties while transitioning.
Now, in the U.S., but also here in Germany to a degree, we see something of a conservative backlash in parts of society at the moment. How is this impacting your daily life, particularly in the German army?
Well, it has no direct impact in my daily duty life as such, but as a queer activist, as an advocate for queer and transgender rights, for equality, for somebody that is fighting for inclusion and trying to maintain an open, inclusive environment that actually reflects diversity and the values of our society. It is something where at least we're very concerned, if there's a shift that will change the policy that we already had in place. It's our stern belief that diversity and inclusion is the only way to move forward. It's only the only way to keep our military, in a sense, viable and effective. And in such a way, as I'm trying to point out, is that we have sharp ears and anything that tries to move against the policy we have fought for hard in the past 10 to 20 years. So we are concerned, but we're open for discussions, and we're fighting hard. We're being loud and we're being visible that our service has the same status and value as that of service of every other service members in the armed forces.
Do you have any advice, Anastasia, that you might offer your American colleagues in this situation?
Stay loud, stay proud, rely on what you learned in those service years. You had a dedicated service career, and you have the support of all your transgender and all your queer allies and of everybody in the European, I guess, all across Europe in the armed forces. And you have PBV at your side. So we can all reach out and we can try to support you as much as possible, and we will do that.
Anastasia, thanks very much for talking with us today. That was Anastasia Biefang.
Thank you very much.